Today we are talking about administrative law. Most law students are not familiar with this type of law, even though it is extensive. Administrative law is at both the federal and state level, but we will only cover federal administrative law here. Administrative law comes from the executive branch, more specifically, agencies that are part of the executive branch, such as the IRS and EPA. Before an agency can create administrative law, it needs the authority to do so. The enabling statute gives the agency the authority to make administrative law. The agency is limited to what is authorized under the enabling statute. For example, take a look at the enabling statute for Homeland Security under the Homeland Security Act. Notice the establishment of the agency and list of its mission and responsibilities. The authority of the Department of Homeland Security is limited to what is contained in this statute. Administrative law is the law issued by agencies pursuant to their authority under the enabling statute. Administrative law includes regulations or rules. These terms are often used interchangeably. Regulations are similar to statutes, but are not statutes. The two work together. For example, Congress passed the Clean Water Act. The EPA issues regulations detailing how to comply with that act. For example, how many parts per million of a chemical results in a violation of the Clean Water Act. That level of detail is not in the statute, it is in the regulations. Legal decisions resolve disputes arising under the agency regulations. These decisions come from courts or administrative tribunals. For example, the International Trade Commission has the authority to issue exclusion orders keeping allegedly infringing imported goods from entering the U.S. It has a trial-like procedure and issues a court-like decision and order. Guidelines are additional instructions about procedures before the agency and interpretation of the regulations. For example, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure is a guideline for procedures for obtaining a patent before the Patent and Trademark Office. Presidential proclamations and executive orders are not laws made by agencies, but are laws made by the executive branch. Many significant laws have been created through presidential proclamations and executive orders. For example, the creation of the Peace Corps. Because of its importance to the practice of law, this video focuses on regulations. Although regulations are similar in some ways to statutes, there is a significant difference in how they are created and published. Unlike Congress, agencies must first publish proposed regulations to the public for comment before the regulations become law. Anyone, including you, can comment on proposed regulations. Comments are also published. You can find proposed regulations, public comments, and final regulations at regulations.gov or the Federal Register, which we will cover in the next slides. Regulations.gov is also where you submit comments. So how do you find regulations? The two main government publications are the Federal Register and Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR. The Federal Register contains all the agency publications, including notices, proposed regulations, public comments, and final regulations. The CFR includes only the final regulations. That is the important distinction between the two. Although both are available in a number of places in print and on the major online legal databases, FDsys.gov, the federal government's website for all its publications, is a great site for both the Federal Register and CFR. FDsys.gov includes the official versions of both publications. It is free and it is updated. FDsys.gov will eventually be replaced with govinfo.gov. First, let's talk about the Federal Register. We already know that the Federal Register is the place an agency publishes notices, proposed rules, comments, and final rules. The Federal Register is published daily, except weekends and holidays. Page numbers accumulate during the year, so you will see citations with very high page numbers. For example, in the citation 80 Federal Register 39,669, 39,669 is the page number. The Federal Register is organized chronologically, so it is not the best place to do initial research. If the Federal Register is not the best place to do legal research, why would you use it? When you need to look at or comment on a proposed regulation, when you need background on why a regulation was proposed, when you need to see public comments on a proposed regulation, when you need a final regulation that has not yet been published in the CFR. Remember, the official CFR only contains the final regulations and is updated once per year. This is a screenshot of the Federal Register webpage at fdsys.gov. As you can see, the current issue is at the top and the archived issues are listed by year below. This is a sample page from the table of contents of the electronic version of the July 28, 2017 Federal Register. See how there are notices, requests for comments, and rules or regulations. For example, under the Food and Drug Administration, there's a new regulation on classification of the adjunctive cardiovascular status indicator, starting at page 35,065. If you were able to click on the PDF, you would see the image at the next slide. This is an image of the page in the Federal Register announcing, summarizing, and giving background on the final rule on classification of adjunctive cardiovascular status indicator devices. If you read the summary and background, you would see that the FDA changed the classification of these devices basically to provide assurance of safety and effectiveness. This regulation comes from the Food and Drug Administration, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. Remember, in the Federal Register, you get the summary and background of the regulation and the final rule. In contrast, in the CFR, which we will discuss next, you only get the text of the final rule. The CFR is what you typically use to research regulations. It contains only the regulations currently in force. It currently consists of 50 titles which are organized by topic, which makes it easier to use than the Federal Register for research. The title numbers do not necessarily match those of the United States Code titles, but sometimes they do. Titles are organized into chapters, parts, and sections. Each title of the official government CFR is updated once per year at the same time every year. There is no pocket part. Any changes after the update are in the Federal Register, which is updated daily until the next printing. To indicate the new yearly publication, the Government Printing Office uses a different color on print volumes for every year. The schedule of updates for each of the titles is listed on the slide. The titles are updated every year on this same day. You can find regulations in the CFR in a number of ways. The CFR has an index in print, which is also available on Westlaw. The annotated United States Code, which contains statutes, often identifies regulations relevant to a particular statute. So if you have a statutory section, you can use that to look for the relevant CFR. If you know the title, you can browse the table of contents for that title in print or online. For example, if you work with customs, you can go to Title 19 and browse the table of contents for that title. You can use term searches in any of the legal databases that include the CFR or in the eCFR. So I just introduced a new term, the eCFR. What is that? The CFR, which we have been discussing, is the official CFR published by the government once per year. That is what you need to cite for legal documents. However, for daily use and research, the eCFR is much more useful. Like the official CFR, the eCFR is online at fdsys.gov, but the eCFR is updated every couple of days. It is easier to browse and search than the official CFR online. However, it is not considered official, so you ultimately need to cite to the CFR. Before we leave the slides, we need to discuss updating regulations. The best way to make sure a regulation is still good law is to check in one of the citators in Westlaw, Lexis, or Bloomberg. There you can check not only if there has been changes to the language of the regulation, but also whether any courts or tribunals have made a decision that negatively impacts the regulation. You also can use the eCFR to get an updated version of the CFR, but there is no indication in the eCFR whether courts have made decisions that negatively impact the regulation. It only contains updated language. This concludes this presentation on administrative law. If you have questions, you can contact us by email, phone, or stop by the library. We would love to see you.